The cameras rolled in silence, catching the soft hum of studio lights above. Johannesburg hadn't hosted anything quite like this before. It wasn't a concert or a celebrity roast. It was something heavier. On one side of the stage sat Trevor Noah, easy smile on his face, dressed sharp as always. His voice had echoed through American living rooms for years, blending comedy with commentary, earning laughs while tackling hard topics. He was the familiar one, the safe one. Opposite him, seated quietly and upright, was President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Dressed in military green with a steady, unreadable stare, he didn't shift in his seat. He didn't smile. His presence filled the space like a shadow stretched across daylight, calm, still, but full of weight. People around the world tuned in expecting something light-hearted. But the moment they saw the two men face to face, it was clear this wasn't going to be that kind of show. The producers had called it a special episode on global justice. They hoped for clever banter, maybe a few tense exchanges, but nothing that couldn't be clipped into social media gold. They told Trevor to steer clear of anything too heavy. No dragging foreign policy too deep. No direct hits. They told Traoré it would be an open conversation, but he hadn't come for that. The first few questions went smooth. Trevor joked about Traoré's uniform. He asked about power in Africa, mixing in a story or two from his childhood. The audience laughed, relaxed, but Traoré didn't bite. He gave short, calm answers, his face unreadable. There was no anger, no heat, just a quiet control that made people nervous without knowing why. Then Trevor shifted his tone just slightly. He leaned forward, still smiling, and asked what everyone was really waiting for. "Don't you think," he said, "that kicking out the French and bringing in the Russians is just switching one colonizer for another?" The laugh track didn't come. The audience didn't clap. Something in the air had changed, a kind of stillness that wasn't natural in a TV studio. Even the camera operators held their breath. Traoré blinked slowly once, then leaned forward too, his eyes locked on Trevor's. There was no flash of anger, no rise in voice, just the kind of silence that makes people look away. He hadn't come to trade clever lines. He hadn't left his people behind just to be a guest in someone else's version of Africa. He came to say something that could only be said face to face, without filters, without jokes, and now, with the world watching, he was ready to say it. Traoré's words hung in the air, sharp and unmoving. Trevor smiled again, but this time it felt forced. He glanced at the audience, hoping their laughter might return and carry him through the moment. But no one laughed. Traoré wasn't joking, and now everyone in the room could feel that. There was a shift, subtle at first, but deep. The air wasn't friendly anymore. It was tight, like something important was about to be decided, and no one could look away. Trevor tried again, softening his tone. "I'm not trying to disrespect your work, Mr. President. I'm just saying people deserve to know who's really in charge. France, Russia. At the end of the day, don't they both want something from Africa?" Traoré nodded slowly, almost like he respected the question. But the look in his eyes said something different. "Of course they want something," he replied. "Everyone wants something from us. Our land, our gold, our silence. The difference is, I stopped pretending it was friendship. That's what makes them angry." The studio was dead quiet now. Even the production crew had stopped moving. People watching at home leaned forward without realizing it. Traoré wasn't raising his voice, but he didn't need to. Every word came out like it had been waiting years to be said. "You say I replaced one master with another," he continued. "But what would you have me do? Ask nicely for independence? Hold elections while foreign soldiers sit on our soil? Smile for the cameras while our children mine the minerals that light up Paris?" Trevor swallowed hard. He was trying to keep up, trying not to lose control of the interview. "But that's the point," he said. "If you're fighting back, fight for real freedom. Not just a different foreign flag." Traoré didn't blink. "You think freedom comes in a vacuum? You think we had the luxury to wait for perfect choices? We took the knife from one hand and used it to cut the rope. If we're still bleeding, it's because the wound was deep, not because we chose to survive." A low sound rose from the audience, not clapping, not cheering, just murmurs of recognition. Something in what he said hit home. Trevor looked away for a moment, collecting himself. But Traoré didn't stop. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Do you think they would ever let someone like me come on a show like this if I wasn't already being watched? If I wasn't already being judged before I spoke a single word?" Trevor didn't answer. "You were born here," Traoré added, voice calm but firm. You know what this land smells like when it rains. But you left, and now you sit in a suit, joking about men like me. Is that what Africa needs? A smile that makes the world feel better while the ground beneath us burns? That hit harder than anything else so far. Trevor looked smaller now, like the stage had pulled back from him. The audience, once ready to laugh, now sat in the kind of silence that doesn't come from confusion but from understanding. Something real was happening, and nobody wanted to be the one to interrupt it. Traoré stepped away from his seat slowly. Not dramatic, not angry, just certain. He walked to the edge of the stage and turned to face the audience, then the camera. He wasn't looking for approval. He was telling a truth that didn't need permission. Our revolution isn't neat. It's not clean. It's not made for television, he said, but it's ours. And that matters more than how it looks on your screens. Then he turned to Trevor. No anger in his steps, no heat in his voice. Just a steady walk, a pause, and a single gesture. With one light tap of his boot, he pushed Trevor's chair slightly off balance. Not enough to knock him over, just enough to remind the room and the world that history has weight, and sometimes it kicks back. Trevor caught his balance quickly, but his face showed something different now. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't angry. He was exposed, like someone who had just seen a version of the truth they hadn't prepared for. Traoré leaned down slightly. That wasn't for you, he whispered. That was for every time our pain became your punchline. Then he turned, hands behind his back, and walked off stage. The show went to a commercial, but the silence stayed. On social media, the moment exploded. No music, no hashtags, just raw video clips and millions of comments. Some were outraged, some were moved. But most just watched, again and again, trying to understand what they had just seen. In Ouagadougou, people filled the streets. In Nairobi, Dakar, Kinshasa, phones lit up with the same message: he spoke for us. Teenagers rewrote old protest songs. Elders cried quietly in front of their TVs. And across Africa, people began asking a question they hadn't asked in a long time: what would it take to stop laughing and start listening? And far from the lights of the studio, in a city where power moves quietly behind closed doors, a diplomat from a European country closed his laptop, leaned back in his chair, and muttered under his breath, "This is going to be a problem." He was wrong. It already was. The video didn't need editing. It didn't need music, hashtags, or trending challenges. It spoke on its own. A president, a chair, a single movement that felt like centuries of silence snapping at once. The clip was raw. It was short, but it was enough. In just a few hours, it crossed borders, broke algorithms, and landed in inboxes of people who never watched politics until now. The message was loud, even without sound. One quiet gesture had said what entire speeches couldn't. In Lagos, students replayed the moment on projectors against school walls. In Accra, an artist painted Traoré's boot in red, resting on a broken colonial emblem. In Dakar, taxi drivers called it the day the mask slipped. Across the continent, the feeling was the same: someone had finally said what needed to be said, and he didn't need permission to say it. Governments didn't take it well. France called for an investigation into the incident. The statement sounded polite, but behind it was anger, fear, and an old reflex to control what couldn't be controlled. In private emails and classified meetings, Western diplomats described the moment as a media disaster and a dangerous symbol. NATO analysts flagged it as a shifting sentiment in African youth and across think tanks and newsrooms. One quiet truth was passed around like a warning: Traoré had broken through. Trevor stayed silent. He didn't post. He didn't tweet. He left the studio through a back exit and avoided all press. In his apartment that night, he watched the clip again, but this time not as the host. He watched it as a man who had once believed his humor could bridge worlds. Now he wasn't so sure. Something in his chest felt heavy. It wasn't shame. It wasn't anger. It was the slow realization that maybe, without knowing it, he had helped protect a story that kept others silent. By the time Traoré landed in Ouagadougou, the whispers had already reached his team. Global sponsors were backing out of aid deals. French ambassadors had been recalled for security reviews. A few international banks quietly froze pending transfers to state development accounts. There were no official announcements, just polite silence with sharp consequences. Still, Traoré didn't flinch. In the back of his convoy, he reread his old notes, scribbled thoughts on sovereignty, raw ideas about independence beyond military uniforms, and patriotic slogans. He remembered the villages where kids carried water in jerrycans taller than them. He remembered the soldiers who died believing they were protecting something real. And in those thoughts, he knew he couldn't stop now, not when the fire had finally caught. That night, the National Assembly was called in with no advance notice. Some ministers arrived in disbelief. Others came with fear written all over their faces. Traoré walked in without guards. He spoke from the center of the room, not behind a podium. He didn't yell. He didn't inspire. He laid out 3 clear actions, each more dangerous than the last: audit the Russians, freeze the foreign licenses, build a new platform to speak directly to Africa. The room cracked open with panic. Some accused him of destabilizing what little security they had left. Others warned of backlash. One minister whispered that Moscow wouldn't tolerate this kind of talk. Traoré let them speak. Then, with a calm voice, he said, "If they're really our friends, they'll stay. If they're not, then we've already made the right decision." It wasn't a speech. It was a line in the sand. Within 48 hours, the pressure came hard. News broke that an audio leak had surfaced, heavily edited, lacking context, but damaging enough to raise suspicion. In the clips, Traoré's voice was heard talking about drone deals, surveillance setups, and backdoor diplomacy. Some clips sounded real. Others were obvious fakes. But it didn't matter. The world doesn't wait for facts. It waits for noise. Western outlets jumped on the story. African leader talks spying tactics. One headline read. Another called it the hidden side of the Sahel strongman. In Moscow, silence. No public statements. But behind closed doors, advisors pulled back. Communications from Russian officials started coming with vague warnings, less warmth. Something had shifted. Inside the palace, Traoré didn't shout. He didn't order investigations or slam fists on tables. He asked for tea. He sat with his inner circle and said one thing: if they're trying to smear me, that means they're scared. That means we hit something true. But not everyone inside was calm. Whispers began soft but persistent. Maybe he was going too far. Maybe the chair kick had brought the wrong kind of attention. Maybe the fire was now too big to control. Even some of his closest allies started taking quiet meetings, just in case. Still, on the streets, the people held steady. Market sellers added his face to currency notes for fun. Teenagers recorded spoken word poems inspired by the moment. Radio hosts in small towns played nothing but protest songs for hours on end. To them, the fight was not about money or policy. It was about finally seeing someone who didn't flinch, and yet Traoré knew what they didn't: that every move now would be watched from multiple directions. France wanted him humbled. Russia wanted him quiet. And the world wanted him labeled. That evening, he stood alone on his balcony, overlooking a city that looked peaceful, but wasn't. He could hear laughter from a nearby street. Somewhere, kids were chasing each other through dusty alleys. A woman was singing an old folk song. And still, the silence inside him held firm. The people were alive. The fire was burning. But the wolves they hadn't left. They had just put on different clothes. He didn't return to the capital with a speech. No marching band. No waving flags. Just a quiet drive, far from the cameras, to a village where the roads were still red dust and the roofs made of sheet metal and hope. Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the car without guards. The people stared at first, unsure. But when they saw he was alone, they stepped forward. He shook hands, hugged elders, helped a child carry water. No press followed. The silence said more than microphones ever could. This was his answer not to the world, but to his own doubts. Power didn't live in studios or palaces. It lived in places where people still fought to eat, to learn, to believe. And it was here that he finally felt free enough to breathe. But freedom was a strange thing now. Back in Ouagadougou, the pressure hadn't slowed. Diplomats came and went, dressed in suits, carrying promises. The unsent envoys for stability. French representatives came with plans for economic cooperation. Russian officials offered silence in exchange for loyalty. The Americans were softer, bringing contracts for schools, roads, clinics, all with fine print hidden behind friendly smiles. Everyone wanted something. Everyone spoke of peace. But Traoré saw the same chains in every briefcase, just shaped differently. He listened carefully. He took every folder. Then he thanked them and walked away. They weren't used to that. They weren't used to someone who smiled but didn't sign, who met their eyes without flinching. It made them nervous. And nervous men with money always find ways to push back. Online, the world broke itself into two. Some called him a savior. Others called him dangerous. Headlines flipped back and forth. Traoré, voice of a new Africa, followed by Burkina Faso's strongman risks isolation. It didn't matter. What mattered was that his people were watching, and he was still standing. Trevor Noah never gave another interview about the incident, but people close to him said he had started something new, not a show, but a film, a long one, not about the chair or the moment itself, but about what led to it, about all the years of pretending Africa was fine because someone was laughing. It was his way of answering, maybe even apologizing without saying the word dot in Burkina Faso. Things didn't get easier. Aid was delayed. Banks grew cold. Food prices climbed. Some families struggled more than before, but something else rose with it, a pride that hadn't been there in years. In schools, teachers replaced old lessons with new ones. Geography now came with context. History came with questions. Children were taught to ask who drew the borders and who benefited from the silence that followed. Some in government couldn't take it. A few left, ran, disappeared. Others stayed. Young faces, no medals, no experience, just fire in their hearts and a will to try. Traoré didn't expect them to be perfect. He just asked them not to kneel. His private thoughts were rarely shared, but one entry from his journal leaked months later. It was simple: we haven't won. We've just stopped losing quietly. That's enough for now. On the one-year mark of the interview, walls across the continent told their own story. Murals appeared in Nairobi, Abidjan, Goma, not of violence, but of stillness. Of Traoré standing, the chair off balance behind him, Trevor looking up in surprise. No captions, no slogans, just that quiet, electric moment where something old broke and something new took its place. It was never about the kick. It was about the space that came after, and in that space, for the first time in a long time, Africa saw itself not as a joke, not as a charity case, not as a headline, but as something whole, something unashamed, something finally allowed to speak. As time moved on, and other leaders rose, and the world found new battles to watch, one thing remained. In a village not far from where Traoré had once walked barefoot in red dirt, a little boy knocked over a wobbly plastic chair and laughed. Someone asked him what he was doing. The boy smiled and said, "We don't sit like that anymore."